I'm glad you're here at Beyond 60 Stories, where every life has a story to tell. Let me ask you something that rarely gets spoken out loud. When a woman in her later years finds herself drawn to an older man, what is she really looking for? It is not youth, excitement, or charm in the traditional sense. What she seeks is something steadier, something that feels safe without being dull, strong without being controlling, present without trying to impress. In today's video, we're exploring why, when a woman craves an older man, she almost always tests him with 3 quiet questions, not to interrogate him, but to feel whether his presence can hold her without asking her to shrink. These questions are rarely asked directly, and most men answer them without realizing they are being answered at all. Before we begin, tap that like button and subscribe to Beyond 60 Stories, because these conversations are not about dating advice or technique, but about understanding the deeper emotional language of love after 60, when words matter less than tone and answers matter less than how they are lived. The first question is never spoken. Can I be myself around you? When a woman in her later years finds herself drawn to an older man, the first test almost never arrives as a sentence. It does not sound like a question, and it is rarely conscious. It emerges through sensation, through the atmosphere between 2 people, through the subtle emotional signals her body registers long before her mind forms an opinion. What she is quietly asking is whether she can exist in his presence without editing herself, without shrinking, without becoming more agreeable than honest. By the time a woman reaches her 60s or 70s, she has lived through enough relationships to recognize a familiar pattern. She knows what it feels like to monitor her words, to soften her reactions, to manage someone else's comfort at the expense of her own clarity. These habits did not form because she was weak. They formed because for much of her life, harmony was valued more than authenticity, and accommodation was often praised as maturity. This is why attraction later in life feels different. It is no longer driven by excitement or fantasy, but by relief. Relief that conversation does not require performance. Relief that silence does not need to be filled. Relief that her presence is not being evaluated, corrected, or subtly redirected. Her nervous system listens closely in these moments. It notices whether she feels more herself or less herself when she is with him, and that sensation becomes the answer. The first test, then, is not about charm, intelligence, or success. It is about emotional spaciousness. Can he allow her thoughts to land without interruption? Can he listen without trying to fix, reframe, or improve what she says? Can he sit with disagreement without withdrawing or becoming defensive? These moments may seem ordinary, but for a woman who has spent decades adjusting herself to preserve connection, they are deeply revealing. Older men who pass this test usually do so without effort. They are not trying to prove anything. They are settled enough in themselves that they do not need to dominate the emotional space or fill every pause. This steadiness communicates something essential. It tells her that she will not be required to manage him emotionally, that her inner world will not be treated as a burden, and that her presence is welcome exactly as it is. What many men misunderstand is that this test has nothing to do with approval. A woman is not looking for agreement or validation. She is listening for safety. Emotional safety does not mean constant harmony. It means that her honesty will not be punished with distance, dismissal, or subtle withdrawal. It means she senses that she can express a boundary, a doubt, or a feeling without being made to feel difficult or excessive. When this kind of safety is present, desire deepens quietly, not because he has impressed her, but because he has not invaded her inner space. He does not rush intimacy or demand emotional access. He allows connection to develop at a pace that feels organic rather than performative. For a woman who has spent much of her life accommodating others, this restraint feels rare and profoundly attractive. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever felt instantly more yourself or less yourself around someone you were drawn to? Your experience may help someone else recognize their own answer. The second question is always felt. Do you lead your life or react to it? The second question is never asked directly, yet it is always felt, and it sounds something like this beneath the surface. Do you lead your life, or do you spend it reacting to whatever arrives? If the first question is about emotional safety, this second one is about orientation, because by the time a woman reaches this stage of life, she has already lived through enough seasons to recognize the difference between calm authority and quiet chaos. She is no longer impressed by intensity, cleverness, or even confidence performed in the right moments, but instead watches how a man moves when plans shift, when tension appears, when silence stretches, and when life refuses to cooperate. What she is sensing is whether his center is inside him or borrowed from circumstances, approval, routine, or control. A man who leads his life does not rush to fix discomfort or defend his image because he is not negotiating his worth in every moment. And this is felt not through speeches or declarations, but through pacing, tone, and presence. He does not escalate when challenged, withdraw when misunderstood, or collapse when outcomes disappoint him. And this steadiness communicates something deeper than reliability, because it signals that his inner life is not being dragged behind him like an unexamined burden. At this age, many women have already lived with men who seemed decisive until life tested them, men whose unresolved resentment surfaced as irritability, whose fear of loss became control, or whose dependence on validation turned every disagreement into a threat. So she watches carefully, not to judge, but to understand whether this man has made peace with the fact that life is imperfect and that leadership begins with self-regulation rather than dominance. What attracts her is not certainty about the future, but coherence in the present, the sense that he chooses his responses rather than being chosen by them, and that his values do not shift with the weather of the day. This question unfolds slowly because it cannot be answered in words, only in patterns, in how he treats a waiter when service is slow, how he speaks about people who disappointed him, how he handles his own mistakes without shrinking or hardening, and how he remains himself when no one is watching. This lesson matters deeply after 60 because love is no longer about potential, but about trajectory. And a woman who has learned from life understands that being with a reactive man means carrying not only her own emotional weight, but his unprocessed inner world as well. When a man leads his life, he does not require a woman to stabilize him, rescue him from his moods, or constantly reassure him of his value. And this creates a quiet sense of freedom that feels like respect. His leadership is not loud or performative, but visible in the way he chooses rest over resentment, reflection over blame, and responsibility over excuses. And this allows intimacy to grow without pressure. The third question is, does he give you more room to be yourself, or does your world slowly begin to shrink around him? By the time a woman reaches this stage of life, the third question is no longer about attraction or even stability, but about space, and it is perhaps the most revealing of all. Does he expand your world, or does he slowly make it smaller without realizing it? This question emerges quietly, not as a challenge, but as a feeling that grows over time, because love after 60 is not measured by intensity, but by whether your breath feels easier or tighter in someone's presence. A woman who has lived fully already knows what it is like to lose herself in adaptation, to shrink preferences to keep peace, to soften truths to avoid conflict, and she recognizes that real affection does not require self-erasure. She watches how a man responds when she chooses her own rhythm, her friendships, her silences, and her interests, and whether he meets her autonomy with curiosity or with subtle resistance disguised as concern. A man who is secure does not experience her independence as a threat because he is not using her presence to complete something unresolved inside himself. And this creates a relationship that feels like two parallel lives walking alongside each other rather than one orbiting the other. What she notices is whether he celebrates her separate joys or tolerates them, whether he listens when she speaks about things that do not involve him, and whether he respects her need to move through the world at her own pace without interpreting it as distance. This lesson becomes especially clear in small moments, in how he reacts when she says no without explanation, when she chooses rest over obligation, or when she holds a boundary without apology. Because these are the moments that reveal whether his love is rooted in respect or in quiet possession. At this age, freedom is not rebellion, but preservation, and a woman understands that the greatest loss is not heartbreak, but the gradual narrowing of one's inner and outer life. She has already paid that cost once, perhaps more than once, and she knows that no companionship is worth the slow erosion of self. When a man honors her freedom, he does not require constant access, reassurance, or alignment, and instead trusts that closeness deepens when choice remains intact. His presence adds warmth without pressure, companionship without demand, and intimacy without surveillance. And this creates a sense of safety that is rare and deeply attractive. Conversely, when a man subtly resists her independence through guilt, expectations, or unspoken disappointment, she recognizes the familiar pattern of love that slowly becomes labor, and she pays attention. This is not about perfection, because no one is free of insecurity, but about willingness to notice, reflect, and adjust rather than tighten control. If there is one thing these questions reveal when we look back from this distance, it is that love after 60 is not about intensity, sacrifice, or proving anything to anyone anymore, but about whether your life feels wider or narrower in someone's presence. Emotional safety, inner steadiness, and respect for freedom are not romantic ideals. They are the quiet conditions that allow affection to last without costing you yourself. When those conditions are present, love feels less like effort and more like ease, less like management and more like shared breathing. And you begin to recognize that the right connection does not demand your energy, your silence, or your shrinking, but meets you where you already stand. If this reflection resonates with you, I invite you to support Beyond 60 Stories by liking this video and subscribing to the channel, because your presence helps keep these honest conversations alive for those who need them later than they expected. And before you go, tell me in the comments what you would like us to explore next here, whether it is love, loneliness, healing, or starting again later in life, because the stories we choose together shape the wisdom we pass on.